Hi everyone, I'm David Fisher, and this is Presidential Chronicles, the series of books and videos on American history as seen through the lives of the presidents of the United States. This episode is from the life of Zachary Taylor, and the focus is Had Enough. The year is 1846, it's November. All of northern Mexico is now in the hands of Brigadier General Zachary Taylor, but a rift has opened between him and the President of the United States, James Polk, who thought the terms he offered the Mexicans after their surrender at the Battle of Monterrey were too generous. In lieu of all of this and some additional thinking, the president decided to change strategy. He now firmly believed that the only way he was going to get capitulation by the Mexicans was to actually take the fight all the way to Mexico City and capture the capital. And to do that, he felt the best route was not through northern Mexico, the route that Zachary Taylor was currently following, but rather to go east into the Gulf of Mexico, land at Veracruz, and then take the road directly west to Mexico City. Well, the president decided to turn to Major General Winfield Scott to lead that campaign. Scott had actually been leading the U.S. Army for the last 3 decades or so, and not a surprise that he would be put in command of this big operation, but Zachary Taylor thought he would at least have an opportunity to participate. He actually agreed with the strategy. He believed that the best route, if you're going to go to Mexico City, would be through Veracruz and the road west. But he thought he would be part of that campaign, even as a subordinate potentially to Scott. But that was not in the cards. President Polk was basically benching Zachary Taylor as part of this change in thought process and strategy. Not going to be any more fighting, but Taylor was going to stay in northern Mexico, kind of hold that line as a defensive line. No more glory for him, but also no more men practically, as almost all of his troops were being transferred. All his officers, all his regulars, and even a lot of his militia were going to go fight for General Scott. Well, he was left with some volunteers, but a much smaller number in order to hold his defensive line. Taylor was furious about this. He said, "I have been stripped by the government of regular troops and reduced in volunteers, and thus stripped and at the mercy of the foe, have been expected by my country to retreat or resign. I shall do neither." So much thanks for his 3 big victories. This is the thanks that he gets, and he was convinced that this was entirely political, because his name had been tossed around by some Whig political folks in the eastern part of the country for the presidency of the United States. Taylor wrote in another letter, "Was I a prominent or ambitious aspirant for civil distinction or honors, I might very readily suppose that there was an intention somewhere among the high functionaries to break me down, which am now satisfied will be done." When this letter was made public, President Polk was angered. He nearly recalled Taylor, but Taylor is still very popular in the country. He decided the best solution, just leave him in place, not a lot of troops left, he'll be done with this fighting. The rift and break between Taylor and Polk was absolutely permanent. Well, for now, Taylor agreed he's going to sit and wait on the outskirts of Monterrey. He'd been at odds with his superiors, clearly, but he was never at odds with the troops. They loved Zachary Taylor. He was fearless in battle, but he was almost like a friendly uncle at other times, and we can hear some of their thoughts. First, from a wounded sergeant who said that Taylor will sit and talk with the commonest soldier in the most affable manner, enter minutely into the private affairs of the soldiers under his command, give them his advice when asked, as it frequently is, and when that is over, read to them from the newspapers the anecdotes of the army, which had made their way into print in the northern cities, at which he would laugh as heartily as any of them. Another perspective from a soldier from Virginia talking about his attire, the plain attire of Zachary Taylor, almost never in full uniform. According to this soldier, his dress is that of a plain country farmer. He never wears a uniform. The neckerchief he has had on every time I have seen him has been of checked or striped cotton, and I believe unhemmed. The plain, no airs. A captain, T.B. Kinder, continued along these lines. "Taylor looks more like an old farmer going to market with eggs to sell than anything I can think of. Jovial and good-natured." Finally, a comment from another officer from Virginia who said that he is perfectly unaffected by his brilliant successes. Plain and unassuming in his kind manners, mild and affable in his disposition, and kind and courteous in his demeanor. You feel at once comfortable and easy in his society. This was old Rough and Ready, the beloved general of the American soldier. Well, eventually, Taylor just kind of got tired of sitting around doing nothing, and he was still responsible for his theater of the war, so he decided to take his men out from behind their defenses to go fight. He set his sights on the town of Saltillo. He was successful. He captured the town, but this was a risky move. General Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna had been building his force to fight Taylor, and that was starting to come together, and Taylor and his men were now out in the open, no longer behind their solid defenses. In fact, Major General Scott urged Taylor to return to those defenses. His response, basically, no. According to Taylor, I would do no such thing without orders to that effect from proper authority, which was not Scott. He didn't work for Scott. Only the Secretary of War could give him those kinds of orders. Lacking that, he was going to still continue under his own authority. Well, the fact is, though, Taylor and his men were in trouble. Santa Anna came close with about 20,000 men, while Taylor had only about 5,000 at his disposal. On February 21st, 1847, Taylor decided to make a stand. About 7 miles outside of Saltillo at La Agaspura Pass, a range of mountains about a mile away from the Buena Vista ranch. Santa Anna and his 20,000 troops arrived the next day, and in fact, he saw that how much he outnumbered Taylor, and he offered to give Taylor the opportunity to surrender to his vastly superior numbers. Well, Taylor just got angry at this, and his top aide, Captain William Bliss, kind of cleaned up to Taylor's expletive-filled response. Both sides were preparing for battle. Now, a little surprisingly, Taylor decided to leave the field that night to go check on the defenses at the town of Saltillo, and that put him out of position when the attack from Santa Anna came the very next morning. Well, and things didn't go very well for the Americans to begin with. First of all, their commanding general wasn't there, and the Mexicans immediately poked a hole in the American left. It created a gap in the American line. Well, Taylor got news of the fight. He got to the battlefield as quickly as possible, took command of the field, he plugged that gap, and he took an aggressive posture. Wasn't just going to sit back on the high ground, which he already had control over. He was going to attack the Mexicans head on, and among the most courageous in this fight, one of his top officers at the time was Colonel Jefferson Davis, his former son-in-law, now leading troops from Mississippi. Davis was wounded in action at the Battle of Buena Vista and performed extremely well. Well, the Americans did benefit from a lot of things. They had superior artillery, relentless musket fire, and very effective use of canister. In fact, at one point, Taylor famously ordered a little more grape to his soldiers, grape shot. Fire that power directly into the onrushing Mexicans, frankly decimating the Mexican lines. Around 5 o'clock, after about 10 hours of fighting, the Americans finally did open up a significant gap in the Mexican ranks. The Americans poured into that opening, and the Mexicans were in full retreat. Another major victory was at hand, the Battle of Buena Vista for Zachary Taylor and his American troops. Now, this one was more costly than his previous victories. 240 were killed, 500 Americans were wounded, but Santa Anna suffered much worse, and in fact, by the next day, Santa Anna was gone. He had left the field, given it to Zachary Taylor. He decided, you know what, I'm not going to fight this guy. I'm going to go take my troops and go for Winfield Scott's effort in trying to block their passage from Veracruz to Mexico City. So this was another one-day fight and a big victory for Zachary Taylor. It would be his final battle because he had had enough. He was disgusted with the political micromanagement, the machinations going on from Washington, D.C. He even heard, interesting comment, he even heard that President Polk might have died. And while he wrote in this letter that he didn't wish death upon anyone, he actually said that he would as soon have heard of Polk's death, if true, as that of any other individual in the whole Union. Pretty telling on the relationship at this point between Commander-in-Chief James Polk and his general, Zachary Taylor. Taylor requested a 6-month leave of absence. It was granted. His next battle would be a political one. That's the story for another day. That is Zachary Taylor and Had Enough from the life of Zachary Taylor. For more Presidential Chronicles, check out my books on Amazon.com. And don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Until next time, I'm David Fisher, and this is Presidential Chronicles.